Don't touch her. He'll lunge. I'm not kidding. He hasn't even let me near her." That was the first thing I blurted out the moment Dr. Ellis stepped one foot into the barn. He paused, with his vet bag halfway open, and blinked at me through the morning sunbeam slicing through the slats in the old wood walls. We both stood still, quiet, save for the occasional soft cry of the kitten, still wrapped in that frayed yellow towel and hidden in the straw. I could see her trembling faintly, but I hadn't dared to get close enough to check. Because right there beside her, in full alert, was Huck. Now, Huck is not what you'd call a scary-looking dog. In fact, he's the kind of dog who'd make toddlers giggle just by wagging his tail too hard. Golden brown fur, shaggy in all the right places. Big brown eyes that usually look like they're begging for a snack. We'd pulled him from a roadside ditch 6 months ago. Skin and bones, ribs sticking out like a Halloween prop. But he came back to life fast. Grew strong again. Got that sparkle back in his eye. But today, that sparkle was gone. Today, he looked like he'd made it his life's mission to protect that tiny kitten from absolutely everyone, including me. Dr. Ellis gently stepped closer, his boots crunching on straw. Huck's body stiffened, his lips pulled back just slightly, just enough to show the warning. Not a growl, not a bark, but the kind of message that doesn't need sound to be understood. I raised a hand. "I'm telling you, he hasn't let anyone near her. I tried to move her earlier when I saw she wasn't breathing right, and he blocked me, sat over her like a statue." Dr. Ellis didn't reply at first. He crouched slowly and gave Huck a long, thoughtful look. "How long's he been like this?" "Since last night," I said. "I was doing a final sweep of the property and saw him lying out here with something tucked under his belly. Figured it was a toy or something dead he dragged in. Turns out it was her." "Did he bring her here?" "I think so. We haven't had any stray kittens around lately. And the way he was nudging her, like he was trying to keep her warm. Has he moved since?" "Nope, not even to eat." That's what scared me. Huck was food-driven. Always had been. The kind of dog who'd drop a tennis ball if you so much as rustled a chip bag. But not today. Dr. Ellis stayed crouched for a while, then slowly pulled a treat from his coat pocket. "Let's see how deep this goes." He didn't throw the treat. He just held it out, palm up, a few feet from Huck. Huck didn't even sniff it, didn't glance at it. His eyes never left Ellis, ears perked forward, tail low and still. "Okay," Ellis whispered. "This isn't just about food, then." I rubbed the back of my neck, heart thudding like I'd run a mile. "So what do we do?" "We wait," he said. "We let him show us what he wants." And so we did. For hours. The barn was quiet that morning, a few crows outside, the occasional wind sweeping dust motes into little swirls in the sunbeam. I sat against the back wall, legs folded, a thermos of coffee growing cold by my side. Ellis didn't move from his crouch. Huck didn't budge. The kitten cried every few minutes, tiny mews that seemed too soft to come from something that still had strength left in it. Around noon, Huck shifted, just barely. He turned his head, nose down, and nudged the kitten gently. She made a sound in response, and then Huck looked at me. For the first time that day, his gaze left the vet. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe too hard. He looked at me, then back at the kitten, then again at me. Ellis leaned forward. "That's him asking for help." "Are you sure? I've seen it before. He's trying to decide if he can trust you with her." That broke me a little. Huck, the dog who'd slept on my couch, followed me room to room, barked at my blender but loved the vacuum cleaner. He didn't trust me right now. I stayed still. What do I do? Wait. Let him decide. Another hour passed. Then Huck did something that nearly made me cry. He stood up, slowly, stiffly. He stretched, then sat down again a few feet away, just far enough to clear space around the kitten. He didn't take his eyes off her. Ellis and I both moved at the same time, cautiously, like we were stepping onto a frozen pond. I got closer, knelt beside the kitten, and finally got a better look at her. Her eyes were goopy and half shut, her breathing ragged. But the worst part was her belly. It was too round, too firm, not with food, but something else. Her ribs looked bruised. Her back legs didn't twitch the way a kitten's legs should. "She's hurt," I whispered. Ellis was already setting up. "Let's get her in the truck. I've got a warmer and a fluid line." I reached out and Huck flinched. Just a bit. I looked at him. "I swear, buddy, I'll be careful." He didn't move. I slid both hands under the kitten, towel and all, and lifted her as gently as I could. She barely stirred. Huck rose instantly and walked beside me, nose inches from her the whole way to the truck. He jumped in the back without being told. He never does that. Ever. Ellis started working as soon as we got to the clinic. Heated blankets, fluids, eye drops, the works. Huck sat beside the exam table like a furry statue. I stayed close, too, but I kept my distance from him. Still wasn't sure where I stood. After about an hour, Ellis let out a sigh. "Her lungs are full of fluid. She's got a few broken ribs. Swollen belly is from internal bruising, not blockage. She was either dropped or—" He looked at Huck, then back at me. "Or stepped on." I blinked. "You think Huck did it?" Ellis shook his head. "No, just the opposite. I think he found her like that, and decided not to let another soul near her in case they made it worse." That did it. I sat down and covered my face with both hands. The thing is, Huck had a history. Before we rescued him, we'd been told he came from a backyard breeding setup that went bad. The police raided it after neighbors complained about barking and smells. There were over 24 animals on the property. Some injured, some worse. Huck had been the one trying to guard the smallest ones. Not with teeth, but by sitting on top of them, blocking them with his body. He'd done the same thing again, this time with a kitten. The next 2 days were touch and go. The kitten, who we started calling Clover, responded to treatment but slowly. She stayed in the incubator most of the time, and Huck barely left her side. We had to put a blanket by the window just so he could lie there and see her. He didn't eat much, didn't play, just watched. On the 3rd morning, I arrived early and found Huck wagging his tail again. Clover was still asleep, but she looked better, less twitchy. Her belly was less swollen. Her ribs still needed time, but she was breathing easier. And Huck? He finally accepted a treat from me. Not just took it, but wagged like crazy after, like he remembered we were friends again. Ellis joined me at the window, coffee in hand. He knew she was broken, and he figured he'd already failed once. I swallowed hard. But he didn't fail. No, he saved her. Outside, the sun started to rise over the fields. A few birds chirped. The world was starting its day. And Huck? He finally lay down, head on paws, eyes soft, like he could finally rest. The 4th time Clover managed to raise her head on her own, Huck cried. Not barked, not whined. He cried. A quiet, breathy sound, somewhere between a sigh and a whimper, like his body didn't know how to express what he was feeling. I was sitting beside him in the clinic waiting room, half dozing on the bench after another long shift on the farm, and I almost didn't hear it. But when I opened my eyes and followed his gaze, I saw her. Little Clover, sitting up inside the incubator, her head bobbing slightly, eyes open. That moment, something shifted. In her. In Huck. In me. Clover had come into our lives like a secret, small, broken, and guarded by a dog who wouldn't let anyone close. But now, just 6 days after we found her, she was pushing through. And Huck? Huck was watching her like she was the only thing keeping the world together. Dr. Ellis noticed it too. He didn't say much, just adjusted the fluid drip and scribbled a few notes, but I saw the grin he tried to hide. Clover wobbled in place, then laid back down again with a tiny sigh that fogged the inside of the plastic window. Huck stood and pressed his nose against it. She blinked. Their eyes met. Later that day, I drove Huck back to the farm while Ellis kept Clover under observation. The silence in the truck was strange. Huck usually had his head out the window, tongue out, ears flapping. Not today. He sat, watching the road ahead like he wasn't really here. Back home, he didn't want to eat, didn't want to play. I tossed his tennis ball out into the grass, and it rolled to a stop. He didn't even glance at it. I sat beside him on the porch steps, both of us facing the field. "She's in good hands," I said, rubbing behind his ears. "He'll call if anything changes." He leaned into my leg, heavy and warm, but didn't relax. The next morning, we were back at the clinic before sunrise. Ellis hadn't even opened yet, but he let us in. Huck trotted straight past him and settled by the incubator. He didn't have to bark or whine. Ellis just smiled and pulled back the curtain. Clover was sitting up again. "I'm reducing her fluids today," Ellis said. "I want to see if she can manage on her own. Her vitals are holding steady." Huck wagged once, slow and deliberate. For the first time in days, I saw his shoulders loosen. The hours passed in slow, hopeful silence. Ellis adjusted Clover's care while I swept the porch out front. Huck stayed inside the whole time. Didn't so much as blink away from that little box. By afternoon, something incredible happened. Clover stood. It wasn't graceful. Her legs trembled like noodles, and she only stayed up for a second. But she did it. And when she flopped back down, Huck gave a short, sharp bark that made Ellis and I freeze. "What was that?" I asked, rushing in. Huck looked back at us and wagged. Ellis chuckled. "I think that's his version of a standing ovation." We all laughed. Even me, who hadn't really laughed in days. Later that week, Ellis made the call. "She's stable enough to leave the incubator. She'll still need close monitoring, but she's eating on her own, breathing on her own, and moving." "You're serious?" "Serious as I've ever been." So we set up a recovery corner at my place. Clean towels, heated pads, soft crate with the top open, water and formula close by. Huck sniffed every corner, every cushion, until he was satisfied. Then he sat right beside it, tail thumping. Clover adjusted slowly. She couldn't walk more than a few steps without needing to rest, and her ribs were still tender. I could see it in the way she avoided lying on her left side. But she was alert, curious. Her ears twitched at every sound, and she'd started responding when I called her name. She also cried whenever Huck left the room. The first time it happened, I was getting ready to take Huck for his evening walk. "Come on, bud," I said, grabbing the leash. He padded over, but the moment we stepped outside, we heard it. A thin, desperate wail. I froze. Huck looked at me, then turned and walked right back in. The moment he was in view, Clover went quiet. I sighed. Guess the walk can wait. That became the new normal. Huck was never more than a few feet from her. At night, he slept beside the crate. During the day, he followed her from corner to corner, sometimes nose-bumping her gently when she got too still. They were becoming something rare, something whole. 3 weeks passed. Clover had gained weight. Her ribs had started to heal clean. She still had a limp in her back right leg, but it didn't stop her from exploring the living room with growing confidence. She'd developed this funny habit of chasing Huck's tail, batting at it like it was a feather toy. Huck would swish it slowly, clearly, for her amusement. One morning, I came downstairs to find them curled up together in the sun patch on the rug. Clover was sprawled across Huck's front paws, snoring softly. Huck lifted his head when I stepped into the room, but didn't move otherwise. I whispered, "You two figured each other out, didn't you?" He blinked slowly, like he understood. But not everything was smooth sailing. Clover had another scare 5 days later. She vomited in the middle of the night. Twice. I found her trembling in the corner near the crate, Huck hovering protectively. I wrapped her in a warm towel and called Ellis. He met us at the clinic in his pajamas. "She's dehydrated again," he said after a quick exam. "Could be a reaction to the new food, or just her system adjusting." He gave her subcutaneous fluids, adjusted her feeding schedule, and kept her overnight. Huck didn't want to leave. He barked once when I tried to open the truck door. Not aggressively, just insistently. So I let him stay. Ellis had a bedroll and a blanket ready for him. "He can stay by her incubator. I'll check on them every few hours." When I came back the next morning, Ellis was sipping coffee and looking tired. "She's doing better. No more vomiting. Started drinking water on her own around 5. I exhaled in relief. And Huck? Didn't sleep all night. He just lay there, watching, didn't even blink half the time. I looked through the glass. Sure enough, there was Huck, head on paws, eyes wide open. "He's not guarding anymore," Ellis said quietly. "He's worrying. He loves her." "Yeah, he does." That night, we all went home together. The bond between them deepened after that. Clover would climb onto Huck's back and fall asleep there, legs sprawled out like a tiny lioness. Huck never flinched. When she cried, he'd be the first to check. If she struggled to climb onto the couch, he'd nudge a pillow under her. I began to notice something in myself, too. Something I hadn't realized I'd needed. Peace. Running a farm on your own isn't easy, especially after losing your family. My parents passed 2 years ago. I'd kept the land out of duty more than passion. Days blurred into each other. Animals were fed, fields were checked, nights were quiet. But then came Huck. And now, Clover. And the silence that once felt empty started to feel gentle. One rainy afternoon, I sat by the window, sipping tea. Huck lay beside me, Clover nestled between his front legs. The soft patter of rain, the hum of the heater, the rise and fall of their breathing. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear hit my hand. It wasn't sadness. It was the kind of crying you do when something finds its place, when the broken pieces stop rattling around and settle, just enough to breathe again. I reached down and scratched Huck behind the ears. "You brought her home," I whispered. "But maybe she brought something back, too." He leaned into my hand. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, the world felt whole. And I knew, deep down, this was only the beginning of whatever story we were building. Me, Huck, Clover, and the peace we hadn't known we were looking for. "Don't panic, but I think Clover's on the roof." That's what I shouted into the phone as I half ran, half tripped out the front door, eyes scanning the shingles above the porch. And there she was, standing right near the edge like a tiny gray gargoyle, tail flicking like she owned the place. Dr. Ellis didn't even hesitate. "I'll bring my ladder." "I've got one," I said, breathless. "Just hurry." But by the time I reached the side of the house and unfolded my creaky ladder, Huck had already beaten me to it in his own way. He stood under the overhang, staring straight up, barking with short, urgent bursts. Clover looked down at him and gave a small chirp, then sat down like she'd finished a task. This all started 2 hours earlier when I stepped outside for morning chores and left the back door cracked. Clover had only just started climbing furniture last week. I hadn't imagined she'd take it further, but I should have known. She was growing bolder every day, and Huck was enabling her. Every new milestone she hit, he celebrated. When she figured out how to jump from the couch to the armchair, he barked. When she started scratching the post on her own, he wagged like mad. But this was new. I climbed the ladder slowly, holding my breath. Clover didn't flinch. She watched me, ears twitching. When I finally reached the top, I saw the window she'd come through. A screen popped loose in the upstairs hallway. She'd squeezed through and wandered out onto the low part of the roof over the porch. I scooped her gently, and she didn't resist. She tucked her nose into my shirt and purred. I didn't scold her. I couldn't, not with Huck barking and spinning in joy down below. After I carried her inside, Huck rushed over, sniffing every inch of her as if confirming she hadn't changed. She gave him a swat on the nose and then flopped down dramatically on the rug. "Roof adventures are over," I said. "Windows stay locked now." The next few days were calmer. Clover explored the kitchen, the laundry room, even the mud room, each time with Huck trailing her like a shadow. He never tried to stop her, just watched, alert but quiet, ready to intervene if anything went wrong. I started leaving them alone for short periods. At first, just to run errands or check on the field. Then gradually longer stretches. One afternoon, I returned from town to find Huck sitting by the window, eyes on the driveway, and Clover asleep in a cereal box on the counter. They had their own rhythm now, their own routines. And for the first time in a long time, so did I. Mornings started early. Clover liked to be fed first thing, and Huck insisted on walking with me to the chicken coop. The chickens had gotten used to him, and he didn't chase them, just patrolled while I gathered eggs. Then we'd return to the porch for breakfast, where Clover would bat at toast crumbs, and Huck would lie in the sun. One morning, Ellis dropped by unexpectedly. "Got news," he said, holding a clipboard. "Good or bad?" I asked. "Depends on how you feel about visitors." I raised an eyebrow. "I don't get many of those." "There's a local shelter organizing a fundraiser," he said. "They want to feature a few animals with recovery stories. You two came up in conversation." "You mean Huck and Clover?" "Yep. The team wants to highlight the bond between rescues. Might help raise awareness, get more people fostering. Thought you might want to participate." I looked over at Huck and Clover, who were currently sharing the dog bed. Clover stretched across Huck's back like it was made for her. "I don't know. Crowds, noise. Huck's not really into all that." "Think about it," Ellis said. "You wouldn't have to do much. Just come by, let folks meet them, maybe share a few words." He left the flyer on the table. I didn't decide right away. But that night, as I brushed Clover's fur and Huck laid his head on my foot, I found myself thinking, maybe it was worth it. Not for the attention, for the chance to remind people that broken things can be made whole again. 2 weeks later, we showed up at the shelter fundraiser. It was held in a park behind the library, with booths and food trucks and rows of adoption pens. I carried Clover in a soft carrier and led Huck on a short leash. We had a spot under a tent with a banner behind us that said, "Meet Clover and Huck, a story of rescue and love." People trickled in slowly, curious at first. Then came the kids. One little boy with red hair and a gap-toothed smile pointed at Clover. "Can I pet the kitty?" I hesitated. Clover was still skittish with new people, but Huck walked up to the boy, sat in front of him, and wagged. The boy crouched to pet Huck, and Clover peeked from her carrier. After a moment, she stepped out. I held my breath. Clover approached the boy, sniffed his shoe, then rubbed against his knee. The boy giggled. "She's soft." I nodded, stunned. "She likes you." More people came. Some asked about the story. Others just wanted to see them. Huck soaked up the attention, and Clover, surprisingly, didn't hide. By the end of the day, we'd been interviewed by a local news outlet, taken a dozen photos, and made more strangers smile than I could count. Ellis came by and gave me a thumbs up. "You did good," he said. On the drive home, Huck rode with his head out the window, tongue flapping in the wind. Clover curled up in the back seat, eyes half shut. I realized I felt lighter. Back at the house, I opened the door and let them both in. Clover leaped from the carrier and darted to her favorite spot by the wood stove. Huck followed, but paused at the doorway, glancing back at me. I crouched and hugged him. "You did good too, bud. Real good." He licked my cheek, then trotted inside. That night, I sat by the window again. Rain tapped against the glass, just like it had that first week. But now there was warmth in it, a kind of rhythm that felt familiar, comfortable. Clover purred softly in my lap, her tiny frame rising and falling with each breath. Huck lay beside us, his tail brushing my foot with each slow wag. I wasn't thinking about loss anymore, or silence, or duty. I was thinking about tomorrow, about morning walks, about sunlit naps, about the way Clover meowed when she wanted attention, and the way Huck always gave it without hesitation. I was thinking about what it meant to be chosen, not by blood or obligation, but by something deeper, by trust, by care, by the simple, unspoken agreement to show up again and again, even when it's hard. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing the trees. Inside, the world kept turning, and I knew, in my bones, we were finally moving with it. The first time Clover climbed onto Huck's back and refused to get off, I nearly spit out my coffee. It was early, fog still lifting off the fields, and Huck was stretched out on the porch, enjoying the first rays of sun. Clover, not yet a full-grown cat, but no longer a trembling kitten either, had leapt from the porch railing onto his spine like it was a saddle. Huck didn't even flinch, just lifted his head, blinked once, and let her settle into place like it was the most natural thing in the world. "She thinks you're a horse," I muttered, watching as she stretched out across his back, paws tucked beneath her, tail wrapped neatly over her own hindquarters. From that moment on, it became a thing. Clover's thing. Huck's thing. Their thing. Every time Huck lay down, she'd find him, clamber up, and claim her spot. I once found her there during a thunderstorm, curled tight and purring, while Huck dozed through the noise like it didn't exist. He didn't care that she poked or shifted. He just let her be. It was around that time that I started taking more photos. Nothing fancy, just shots on my old phone. Clover in the sink, Huck beside the laundry, both of them staring out the window together. I started posting them online, mainly for friends, but a friend shared one, then another. And suddenly people I didn't know started following the posts. The photo that went viral was of Huck carrying Clover's toy mouse in his mouth, dropping it beside her like a gift. The caption read, "He brings her mice. She brings him peace." I hadn't expected the response. Thousands of shares, comments from people all over the country, messages from folks saying the photo made them cry in the best way. Ellis teased me at the clinic. "You're raising the bar for interspecies friendships." I shrugged. They're just being themselves. But it was more than that. People were connecting to the story. Rescue dog protects injured kitten. Kitten heals. Dog and cat become inseparable. It was simple, sure, but something about it struck people. Maybe because it felt like the world was so loud, so fast, and this was quiet, gentle, real. The shelter fundraiser asked if they could use the story again in a larger campaign. I agreed, and they sent out a photographer. She spent an afternoon with us, snapping pictures while Clover climbed the porch rail and Huck dozed nearby. She caught the moment Clover jumped from a stump and landed squarely on Huck's back, and the way he turned to look at her with what I swear was a grin. "Do you train them to do that?" she asked. I laughed. They trained each other. But not all the attention was easy. A few weeks later, a reporter showed up unannounced. I was out by the barn, fixing the gate, when she walked up with a clipboard and a camera guy. "We're with Pet Nation Weekly," she said. "We wanted to get a few shots of the famous duo." "They're not for sale," I said immediately. "Oh no, not that. Just a story, positive, feel good. Can we talk?" I hesitated. The last thing I wanted was to turn this into a spectacle, but I also knew the attention was helping the shelter, helping other rescues. So, I agreed to a short interview. We sat on the porch while Clover batted at Huck's tail in the background. The piece came out a week later. It was tasteful. Sweet. No drama. Just their story and a few photos. The headline read, "A Dog's Vow, How Huck Chose to Save One Tiny Life and Found His Own." It still made me tear up. A month passed. Spring rolled in. Clover grew bolder with every passing day. She chased grasshoppers in the yard, climbed the barn beams, and learned how to sneak past the chicken wire. Huck was always nearby, always watching, always ready to step in. One morning, I found Clover limping. She was dragging her left hind leg, the one that had been injured when we first found her. I carried her inside, heart pounding, and called Ellis. "Bring her in," he said. "I'll be ready." Huck rode with his head in my lap the entire way. At the clinic, Ellis examined her leg and frowned. "It's not a new injury, just strain. She's growing fast. Might have overdone it." "She always overdoes it. She's tough. We'll give her anti-inflammatories. No climbing for a week." I glanced at Huck. "Tell that to her bodyguard." Back at home, we created a new routine. Limited space, no outdoor play. Clover wasn't pleased. She meowed in protest every time I blocked her path to the door. Huck tried to distract her with toys. Sometimes it worked. Other times, she swatted him and sulked. But he never left her side. One evening, I was fixing a loose floorboard in the hallway when I heard a yowl. I dropped the hammer and ran, heart in my throat. Clover was stuck halfway up the bookcase, rear paw dangling. She'd tried to jump and misjudged. Huck was already beneath her, barking. I reached her in seconds, lifted her down gently, and checked her paws. She hissed, not at me, but at herself. She was frustrated, angry that her body wasn't keeping up with her spirit. I sat on the floor, Clover in my lap, Huck pressed close. "She's going to be okay, right?" I asked. Ellis said yes. The strain would heal, but it reminded me that her early injuries had left marks. Not all of them obvious. She'd always have limits. We just didn't know what they were yet. The next day, I noticed something new. Huck stopped letting her climb. He'd nudge her back down gently, block the path with his body, steer her toward softer spots. And she let him. For the first time, she didn't fight. She didn't pout. She listened. And I realized that trust doesn't always mean letting someone go. Sometimes it means staying close enough to catch them when they try too hard. That night, I lay awake longer than usual. The farmhouse was quiet. Wind rattled the windows, and the old pipes groaned like always. Huck was snoring on the rug. Clover lay curled in her usual spot at the crook of my arm. I watched her chest rise and fall, and I thought about all the ways rescue changes you. Not just the animal. You, the person who gets drawn into their story without meaning to. The person who says, "Just for now," and ends up rearranging their entire life. I didn't rescue Huck, not really. He rescued Clover, and together they rescued me. But that wasn't the end of the story. The next morning brought a letter in the mail. A local middle school was planning a unit on kindness and empathy. The teacher asked if we could come speak to the kids. Not for long, just to share Huck and Clover's story. I stared at the envelope for a long time. Then I looked at Huck and Clover, curled together on the rug. Maybe it was time to share what they'd taught me. About loyalty. About healing. About what it means to protect something small just because it matters. About how love, in its quietest forms, can be the loudest message of all. The gymnasium smelled like floor polish and crumpled paper, and the bleachers creaked under the weight of 80 restless sixth graders. I had Clover tucked into a carrier lined with soft fleece, and Huck sat at my heel, tail tapping gently against the tiles. The school had invited us to speak during their Empathy Week, a program the principal said was meant to help kids understand compassion beyond the classroom. I hadn't done anything like this before. Public speaking was never my thing. But when I told Huck and Clover's story to a room of squirming 12-year-olds, something unexpected happened. They listened, not just politely, really listened, eyes wide, some leaning forward, some mouthing along as if they already knew parts of it from the news clips or their parents. I didn't use a microphone. I didn't need one. I just told the story like I was talking to a friend. I started with the day Huck refused to let anyone near the kitten. Told them how scared I'd been, how confused, how I'd thought maybe something was wrong with him, when really he was the only one who understood what she needed. I told them about Clover's injuries, her tiny ribs, her uneven breathing, how Huck never left her side, and how slowly she started healing, not just because of medicine, but because of him. I told them about the porch naps, the toy mice, the roof incident that nearly gave me a heart attack. The part that got them the most, though, was when I said, he never stopped protecting her, not when she was weak, not when she got strong. He just adapted. He learned how to protect her without holding her back. One girl raised her hand. "Does she still sleep on him?" "Every day," I said. Another asked, "Does he ever get tired of it?" I laughed. If he does, he's never shown it. After the talk, the kids came up in waves. Some wanted to pet Huck. Others just stared at Clover, now dozing in her carrier, with awe. One boy whispered, My dog bit me once, but I think it was just scared. Like Huck was, right? Maybe, I said. Sometimes scared looks like anger, but it's not the same thing. That afternoon, the teacher sent me a photo one of the students had drawn. It was Huck and Clover sitting side by side, wearing tiny superhero capes. It made me cry. Back at home, the day settled into routine. Clover darted around the living room chasing a twist tie, and Huck sprawled in the hallway, occasionally lifting his head to check on her. I sat at the kitchen table answering emails from shelters and schools who'd seen the talk online. They wanted to invite us. Arizona, Ohio, one from Alaska. It felt surreal. I wasn't a speaker, I wasn't a trainer. I was just a guy with a rescue dog and a kitten who got lucky. But the story mattered. And the more people who heard it, the more seemed to remember that kindness doesn't have to be loud to be strong. Still, I was cautious. Huck and Clover came first. If a trip was too far, too disruptive, I said no. We stuck to short drives, day events, nothing that took them out of their comfort zone. A local animal shelter reached out about a summer fair. They wanted us to headline a Tales of Love tent. Huck would be the ambassador for dog adoptions and Clover for kittens. It sounded silly on paper, but I agreed. The fair was a blur of color and music. Kids ran past holding balloons, and tents flapped in the breeze. Our setup was tucked beside the adoption pens. Huck lay on a rug under a table, while Clover perched in a playpen with soft toys and a perch she'd already claimed as her throne. A girl sat cross-legged nearby, watching them. She had a name tag that said Melissa, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She didn't say anything at first, just stared. I knelt beside her. "You like cats?" She nodded. "My dad says I can't have one, but I like watching them." "Watching's a good start. Is she the kitten from the story?" "That's her. That's Clover." She stared longer. Then, in a whisper so soft I barely heard it, she said, "I had a kitten once. She died." I didn't answer right away, just sat with her in the silence. After a minute, I said, "That hurts, doesn't it?" She nodded, tears welling. I motioned for her to hold out her hand. She did. I opened the pen, lifted Clover, and gently placed her in the girl's lap. Clover didn't squirm, didn't fight. She lay there and began to purr. Melissa's shoulders shook once, then settled. She looked up at me. "Thank you." "You're welcome." The rest of the fair passed quietly. Huck got his share of pets. Clover eventually curled up in a basket and napped. We went home tired, but not drained. It was a good kind of tired. That night, as I brushed Huck's coat and Clover chewed on a felt mouse, I thought about how loss carves space in us. How it leaves these hollow parts that feel useless until something comes along and fills them in a new shape. Not the same, never the same, but full nonetheless. I found myself reaching out to more shelters, not to book events, but to help. I set up a little section on the back of the barn and converted it into a safe recovery area. Clean crates, heat lamps, food, and medicine. I let Ellis know. He started bringing over animals too fragile for the busy clinic. Strays, injured barn cats, abandoned pups. Huck supervised. Clover observed. And one by one, those animals started to heal. Some stayed for a week, some for months. We had a one-eyed chihuahua named Beans, who waddled like a penguin and hated everyone except Huck. We had 3 kittens born in a shoebox, all of them now adopted. And we had Rusty, An old retriever with a limp and a bark that scared the mailman but made Clover curl up beside him every evening like he was her grumpy uncle. It wasn't just about helping animals anymore. It was about rebuilding community. One neighbor dropped off blankets. Another brought extra feed. A teenager came by to volunteer and ended up spending 3 hours drawing portraits of every animal. And through it all, Huck and Clover remained the heart of the place. They greeted every new arrival. They sensed when to give space, when to press close. They made each animal feel seen. One morning, I found Clover curled beside a shaking kitten barely big enough to hold up its head. Huck was lying on the other side, creating a warm cocoon of fur and safety. The kitten stopped shaking after an hour. By afternoon, it was purring. And that's when I knew this wasn't a phase. This was the life we'd built. A quiet sanctuary tucked between cornfields and gravel roads where animals could come broken and leave whole. And none of it would have happened without the dog who wouldn't let me touch the kitten, who, in refusing to move, moved everything else. Clover disappeared for 7 minutes. 7 very long minutes. I had just let her out onto the screened porch, like I always did every morning while I prepared Huck's breakfast, and when I turned around to check on her, she was gone. Gone. The screen door to the side garden had a rip, small, maybe the size of a grapefruit. I'd been meaning to fix it. Apparently, she found it before I did. Huck noticed at the same time. He dropped the tennis ball from his mouth and barked sharply, once, then took off. I ran out barefoot, heart pounding. The garden was quiet. No chirping, no squirrels, no wind. Just the sound of my own breath and the frantic crunch of Huck's paws through the underbrush. "Clover!" I called. "Clover, come!" I checked under the porch, behind the rose bushes, around the compost bins. Nothing. Then, out by the back of the field, I heard a rustle. Huck's head popped out of the tall grass, and just beside him, like a gray blur, was Clover. She didn't look scared. If anything, she looked pleased. She had something in her mouth, a stick, no longer than a finger. She dropped it at Huck's feet, sat down, and meowed. I sank onto the grass, shaking from the rush. "You scared the life out of me." Huck wagged his tail. Clover gave a tiny chirp and started batting the stick. That day, I replaced the screen. But it was a reminder. Clover wasn't a fragile kitten anymore. She was growing, testing boundaries, looking for ways to expand her world. Huck still watched over her, but he wasn't smothering her. He let her explore, let her lead sometimes. And somehow, they figured out how to stay connected even with a little distance. We started taking short hikes together. Nothing strenuous, just wooded trails near the property, a few meandering paths through old farmland. Clover rode in a special sling across my chest, and Huck trotted ahead, ears perked. On those walks, something shifted again. I began noticing things I hadn't before. The way Huck would stop suddenly and glance back if I paused too long. The way Clover's ears tilted with every new sound, the sharp rustle of a bird or the buzz of a fly. One day we saw a deer. It stepped into our path like something out of a painting. Clover froze. Huck sat down. I stood completely still. For a long moment, none of us moved. Then the deer blinked slowly and walked away. That evening, I started sketching. It had been years since I drew anything. Back in high school, I used to fill notebooks with doodles, mostly landscapes and animals, but life had a way of crowding that stuff out. Now, it was coming back. I drew Huck first, then Clover, then the two of them together, curled up beneath the porch swing. The sketches weren't perfect, but they felt honest. I shared a few online. The response was gentle, grateful. People wanted more. Someone messaged me asking if I'd ever considered writing a children's book. I laughed at first, but the idea sat with me. A few nights later, I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of tea, Clover batting at my pen, Huck asleep at my feet, and I started drafting. The story wasn't elaborate. It was about a dog who found a kitten and decided not to move until someone helped her. About a promise he made without words. About how love could be both fierce and soft. I worked on it between chores, between feedings, between walks. Huck and Clover became my editors. Clover pawed at pages she liked. Huck drooled on the ones I rewrote. I sent the draft to a small press a friend recommended. I didn't expect anything. A month later, they called. They wanted to publish it. We called it The Day Huck Stood Still. They asked for photos of the real Huck and Clover to include in the back. I sent dozens. One of them, Clover curled on Huck's back beneath the barn window, became the cover inspiration. As we prepared for the book's release, I made sure Huck and Clover's routines stayed unchanged. Morning porch time, walks through the pasture, nap sessions under the oak, but more people started visiting the farm. Some came with kids, others brought donations. A few even asked if they could sit with the animals for a while. One woman showed up with a trembling puppy wrapped in a blanket. "He was dumped at the rest stop," she said. "I don't know where else to go." I took the puppy in, gave him a corner in the recovery barn, named him Buttons. He didn't bark, barely moved. But Huck visited him every hour, sat outside his crate, brought him toys. Within a week, Buttons was chasing Clover's tail. We took in more. A paralyzed tabby named Fern, a sheepdog with a missing paw, a runt piglet who squealed louder than a foghorn, but loved Huck like a sibling. Each time, Huck and Clover adapted. They made room. They taught by presence. They reminded each newcomer, "You're safe here." And something amazing happened. The animals started helping each other. One morning, I walked in to find Fern grooming Buttons. Another day, the piglet, Peanut, was lying beside an old lab with hip issues, their bodies pressed close for warmth. Clover became the ambassador of comfort. She'd climb into crates, lie beside the shivering, and stay there for hours. Huck managed the rest. If a bark got too loud, he was there. If someone panicked, he intervened. Always gently. Always in control. I stood by, watching it unfold. It felt like something bigger than me. Bigger than the story we'd started. People sent letters. Photos. Stories of their own pets who'd bonded across species. One family mailed us a portrait their daughter had drawn of Huck with angel wings. Another sent a quilt covered in tiny stitched images of Clover's face. We hung the quilt in the recovery barn. Then came the request from the library, a reading event. They wanted me to bring Huck and Clover and read the book aloud. I almost said no. Crowds were hard for Clover. Loud noises spooked her. But something in me said to try. So we did. We arrived early. The librarian had set up a soft chair, a rug, and a few rows of floor cushions for the kids. Huck lay beside me. Clover sat in my lap, alert but calm. I read slowly, carefully. As I said the words, about a dog who stood still and the kitten who healed, I looked around. Every child's face was still. Every adult leaned forward, and Clover didn't twitch once. When I finished, a boy in the back raised his hand. "Did you know he was going to protect her that way?" he asked. I smiled. I don't think even he knew. He just did what his heart told him. The boy nodded, like that made sense. That evening, back home, I sat on the porch with Huck and Clover beside me. The sky turned lavender. The trees swayed gently, and I thought, not for the first time, that some stories aren't planned. They find you. In a barn, in a field, on a porch, with a dog who wouldn't move, and a kitten who didn't give up. We weren't near the end, not even close. We were just learning how to keep walking. By the time the first snow arrived, Clover had claimed the entire back of the couch as her personal kingdom. From there, she could oversee the living room, the porch, and when she stretched just right, the front yard too. Huck preferred the braided rug in front of the wood stove, where the heat melted into his coat and made his tail thump slow and steady in his sleep. The house felt fuller in the winter, like the walls held more warmth because of them. Animals still came through. A black and white cat with frost-bitten ears, a dachshund with a limp and a distrustful growl, a motherless opossum the size of a soda can. Each one had a story, and each one brought something new into our routine. Some stayed only days, others for weeks. But all of them came under the same roof, and all of them felt Huck and Clover's welcome long before they felt mine. We put up a small tree that year. Nothing fancy, just one I cut from the back edge of the property. I trimmed the lowest branches so the animals couldn't knock it over. Still, I caught Clover swiping at the lights when she thought I wasn't looking. She never hit them, just batted gently, eyes wide with mischief. One morning, after a fresh snowfall, I found tiny paw prints leading away from the barn. Not Clover's. Smaller. Lighter. I followed them out to the far fence line and found a kitten shivering near a fallen log. All bones and fear, eyes crusted, legs too weak to run. I wrapped it in my coat and hurried back. Inside, I settled it into a blanket-lined box near the stove. Clover leapt down from her perch, approached slowly, and sniffed. Then, without hesitation, curled around the newcomer. Huck followed minutes later, sat beside the box, watched, then dropped his favorite toy, an old tennis ball, chewed soft from years of love, next to the kitten's head. It broke something open in me. The next day, I called Ellis. He came by, examined the kitten, started treatment. "It's a girl," he said. "Dehydrated but no broken bones. You found her just in time." I named her Flick. Flick stayed in the house for weeks. Clover adopted her like a sister. Huck took on the role of sentry. When Flick's eyes cleared and her appetite returned, she chased both of them relentlessly. I hadn't planned on keeping her, but Huck and Clover decided for me. It became clear in little ways. The way Clover let Flick nap in her usual spot. The way Huck stopped guarding the door when Flick darted outside. The way they all sat together in a pile when the wind howled too loud at night. The sanctuary was growing, not just in number, but in meaning. More neighbors started stopping by. A retired couple offered to help rebuild the old chicken shed into a proper animal shelter. A high school senior asked if she could volunteer as part of her senior project. People brought towels, crates, old food bowls. One woman knitted tiny sweaters for every dog that came through. Some days I barely had time to sit, but every evening I made time to walk the pasture with Huck and Clover. And now Flick trailing behind, hopping through the grass like it was all new. One cold night, I got a call from the sheriff's office. A hoarding situation had been reported out by the county line. 20 dogs, dozens of cats. Could we help? I said yes before thinking it through. The next morning, they brought 4 dogs and 6 cats. I rearranged the barn to make space. Ellis came by with supplies. A neighbor helped clean crates. We worked into the night. Huck watched it all, quiet, alert, moving from pen to pen. Clover and Flick stayed inside, but they knew something was different. Clover paced. Flick meowed at the door. When I finally let them out to explore, Clover went straight to the worst-off cat and lay down beside the crate. Didn't move for hours. The cat, an old gray with barely any fur, stopped trembling by dawn. We started calling her Maple. Weeks passed. Snow deepened. Days got shorter. But the barn pulsed with life. Dogs barked. Cats meowed. Heaters hummed. And in the middle of it all were Huck and Clover and Flick. My trio. My anchors. The book gained traction. I was invited to a reading at the state library. This time, I brought all 3 animals. Flick rode in a small carrier. Clover curled on the table beside me. Huck sat with his head resting on my knee. I read the story. I told them the real version. I showed the photos. Afterward, a woman came up to me, tears in her eyes. She was in her 60s, maybe older. "My son passed away last year," she said. "He had a dog just like yours. This story, it helped." I didn't know what to say. I just hugged her. She cried into my shoulder. When we returned home, I fed the animals, swept the floor, sat in the quiet. Then I drew again. This time, not just Huck and Clover. I drew them with Flick, with Maple, with Buttons and Fern and Peanut and the rest. Each one had a place. Each one had a line. And the more I drew, the more I saw how connected it all was. The night Huck stood still, everything changed. Not just for Clover, not just for me, for everyone who'd ever needed a place to land, for every animal that showed up in the cold, for every person who needed a reminder that love is a decision we make over and over, even when it's hard. Even when it's quiet. Even when it's 7 minutes of panic in the snow and a stick dropped at your feet like a gift. That winter, we didn't just survive. We expanded. We deepened. We welcomed. And somewhere between the first snowfall and the thaw, I realized something. Huck wasn't just protecting the kitten anymore. He was teaching the rest of us how to protect each other. In early spring, when the thaw came in slow trickles and the world smelled like wet earth and new beginnings, Clover started limping again. Not badly, not enough to panic, but just enough to make Huck trail a little closer, his nose nudging her gently every few steps. We were walking the usual loop around the pasture, Flick bounding ahead, her tail flicking in every direction, full of energy like the season itself. Clover stayed close to Huck. She didn't yowl, didn't whimper, just slowed down, measured her steps. It reminded me how much her early injuries had lingered below the surface, like old stories you don't tell out loud but still carry. I picked her up after a few minutes. She didn't protest, just settled into my arm, her head resting against my shoulder, eyes half closed. When we got home, I made a warm nest on the couch and called Ellis. "Could be a flare-up," he said. "Early injuries like hers can act up during weather changes. Bring her by, but don't worry too much unless it worsens." It didn't worsen, but it didn't disappear either. We adjusted her routine. Less running, more snuggling. Flick didn't seem to mind. If anything, she grew more attentive. She started bringing Clover small objects, twigs, feathers, once even a beetle. Clover accepted each gift with a kind of resigned amusement. Huck stayed steady, watching, always watching. That month, we got an email from a university vet program in the next state. One of the professors had seen the shelter campaign and the book. They were organizing a compassion in practice seminar and asked if we'd be willing to speak. Not just about rescue, but about recovery, long-term care, and the human-animal bond. I almost said no. Then I looked at Huck, at Clover, at Flick, now sleeping upside down in a basket full of clean laundry. We went. The drive was long, but we broke it up with stops at rest areas. Huck trotted the length of each grassy patch. Clover stayed curled in her carrier, occasionally peeking out. Flick insisted on perching in the back seat like a queen surveying her domain. At the seminar, we were one of 5 guests. The others were vet techs, shelter workers, a retired trauma nurse with a therapy dog. When it was our turn, I brought all 3 animals to the front. The auditorium was quiet. Just the shuffle of notebooks, the low hum of lights. I didn't give a speech. I told a story about a dog that wouldn't let anyone near a broken kitten, about how stillness saved a life, about how protection isn't always loud. I showed a short slideshow, a few pictures of Huck and Clover, then some of the newer animals. A slide of Flick curled on Huck's paw, one of Maple lying beside Clover. One student asked, "Do you think they know what they're doing?" "I think they know how to love," I said, "and I think they decide to do it over and over." Afterward, students came up to meet them. Some crouched beside Huck, silent and reverent. A few asked to hold Clover. Flick, of course, basked in the attention like she was born for it. On the way home, the sky turned pink and gold across the interstate. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Huck's eyes closed, Clover curled against his side, Flick tucked against them both. That night, I found an envelope slipped into my bag. Inside was a handwritten letter from a student. She wrote about losing her family's dog 2 years earlier, about how she had almost dropped out of vet school from the grief. But Huck and Clover's story reminded her why she started in the first place. I hung it by the door. Back on the farm, the rhythm picked up again. The thaw brought new arrivals. A litter of kittens found under a porch. A senior beagle with cloudy eyes and a wheeze that rattled the windows. A goat. Yes, a goat. Someone left it tied to our fence with a note that read, "Her name is Muffin. Please don't be mad." I wasn't mad. Muffin adjusted faster than any animal we'd taken in. Within a week, she was following Huck like a 4-legged shadow. Flick challenged her to sprints around the barn. Clover, once her legs stopped aching, watched from a hay bale like royalty. People started calling the place the Quiet Farm. Not because it was silent, far from it, but because something about it made them feel still, at ease, like they could breathe again. One Saturday morning, I woke to the sound of laughter outside. A group of kids from town had arrived early for a planned visit. They stood near the fence, giggling as Muffin tried to eat one of their scarves. I walked out with coffee, Clover on my shoulder. Huck and Flick bounded out ahead. "Can we help feed them today?" one boy asked. "Sure," I said. "But be ready to work. The goats don't go easy on anyone." They helped carry feed, refill water buckets, sweep the barn. I watched them kneel beside the crates, speaking softly to the new rescues. No fear, no hesitation, just gentleness. Later, one girl asked, "How do you know who to keep and who to send to new homes?" I thought about it. You don't always know. Sometimes they choose you. Sometimes they stay because leaving would mean something's missing. Other times, they heal and move on. You just listen. You watch. They tell you, in their own way. That afternoon, a new cat arrived. Ginger-striped. Haggard. scars on his ears and one blind eye. We named him Sawyer. Sawyer didn't want attention, hissed at everyone, even Huck. But Clover? She walked right up to him, sat down, and did nothing. Just waited. By dusk, he let her sit beside him. By morning, he didn't flinch when I brought him food. Day by day, he came closer. Flick pestered him with toys. Huck gave him space. And soon, the hissing stopped, replaced by slow blinks and soft purrs and a quiet he hadn't known he needed. There was no plan, no big mission, just daily choices. Let them in, keep them safe. Listen. The kind of choices that Huck made every single day, and because of that, we all learned how to live a little better. Not perfectly, just better, more present, more gentle, more open. It wasn't magic, it was care. And care, when given without conditions, has a way of multiplying. Like Clover's quiet patience, like Flick's endless curiosity, like Huck, who never asked for anything except the chance to protect someone again. The morning everything changed again started with a storm. Not a loud one, no thunder or wild winds, but a steady gray drizzle that soaked the fields and turned the barn path into thick, boot-sucking mud. I was already outside by 6, pulling tarps over the feed bins and making sure Muffin hadn't found a way to chew another hole in the shed wall. Flick danced around puddles like she'd trained for it. Clover stayed on the windowsill inside, eyes tracking everything with slow, deliberate movements. Huck, as always, stayed near me. Rain didn't faze him. He walked the perimeter of the property as if he were checking every corner for some unseen danger. His coat glistened, his gait steady. Nose low. I'd long stopped wondering what he smelled that I couldn't. He had a way of sensing when something was coming. That day, something did. Around 9, a car rolled up the gravel drive. Not one I recognized. A tall man stepped out, mid-40s, sharp features, long coat already soaked. He didn't smile, didn't wave. Just walked toward the porch and waited. I met him halfway. "You're the guy with the animals?" he asked. "I take in rescues, yeah. Can I help you?" He reached into his coat and pulled out a damp envelope. "I'm Sam, my sister. She passed last month. This is her dog. She left a note saying this was the place. I didn't know what else to do." He opened the back seat. Inside was a crate, and in it, curled so tight I couldn't tell where its head began, was a shivering golden retriever. "He hasn't eaten in days," Sam said quietly. She was the only person he really trusted. He just lies there now. Won't move. He lifted the crate, set it down gently, and stepped back. She talked about this place like it was magic. Said you had a dog who knew how to love things back to life. I didn't know what to say. So I nodded, took the crate, thanked him. He didn't stay, just turned around and drove off. I brought the dog inside. He was maybe 6 years old, well-fed once, but thin now, coat dull, eyes flat. I opened the crate and waited. He didn't come out. Clover approached first. She sat a few feet away, quiet. Flick, surprisingly, didn't try to inspect. Huck walked forward, paused, then lowered himself to the floor. He didn't bark, didn't whine. Just lay there, waiting. Hours passed. By sunset, the dog hadn't moved. I placed a bowl of food just outside the crate. He didn't look at it. "His name's Rowdy," I said aloud, repeating what Sam had told me. "You don't have to be brave yet. You just have to be here." That night, I left the crate door open. The next morning, it was empty. Rowdy hadn't gone far, just curled up under the table in the corner of the living room. Clover slept nearby. Huck was on the rug, head tilted toward him. He didn't move when I walked past. But the next day, he lifted his head. The day after that, he ate. And by the end of the week, he was following Huck across the yard. He didn't trust me. Not yet. But he trusted Huck. And that was enough. Meanwhile, Sawyer, the scarred tomcat, started sleeping beside the goat. Maple took a liking to the beagle with the wheeze. Flick convinced the opossum to climb the laundry basket. I couldn't keep track of the strange friendships anymore. I didn't try to. One afternoon, I found a cardboard box by the gate. No note. Inside were 4 guinea pig siblings, wide-eyed and scared. We brought them into the sunroom. Clover watched them like a fascinated librarian watching noisy visitors. Flick tried to teach them how to chase paper balls. Huck poked his nose into their pen gently and then sat beside it like a patient teacher. People started writing letters again. Some wanted to adopt. Others sent donations. One artist sent a massive painting of Huck surrounded by the other animals. He wore no crown, no armor, just sat in the center, eyes gentle, with all the others leaning into him. I hung it above the fireplace. When I showed it to Huck, he looked at it, then turned to Clover and licked her head once. I got invited to another school event. A teacher from a nearby town had seen the news coverage and asked if we could visit during their kindness week. This time I brought Rowdy too. He didn't do well with crowds, shook during the drive, refused to leave the crate at first. But when we got to the school lawn, Huck walked over to the crate, sat beside it, and waited. After a while, Rowdy stepped out. The kids sat in a circle. I told the story again. This time, I ended with Rowdy. He didn't need fixing, I said. He needed space, and time, and someone to sit beside him while he decided to come back. A boy with big glasses raised his hand. "Did the dog know you were trying to help?" "No," I said. He just knew Huck wasn't afraid of his sadness. We went home quiet that day. Tired, but good tired. That night, I sat on the porch with Rowdy beside me. He wasn't touching, but he wasn't far. Clover was stretched across the swing. Flick chased a moth. Huck sat between us all, as if he could hold the whole space together just by being there. I thought about how many lives had crossed our fence line, how many creatures had been held together not by cages or orders or training, but by presence. By that silent promise Huck always kept. "I'm here. I see you. Take your time." And one by one, they had all responded. They had all healed. Some left. Some stayed. But none of them were the same as they were when they arrived. Neither was I, and Huck, he had become more than the dog who wouldn't let me touch a kitten. He had become a teacher, a shepherd of broken things, a keeper of second chances. And every day, I learned something new from the way he stayed exactly where he was needed, until the hurting softened and the living began again. The first real heat of summer came early that year. It swept in fast and thick, curling off the porch rails and painting the air with the smell of grass and warmed wood. By mid-morning, every dog on the farm had retreated to shade. The cats stretched themselves long on the cool kitchen tile. Even Muffin, our ever-curious goat, lay still beneath the maple tree out back, chewing lazily and swatting flies with her tail. Clover had taken to the screened porch, where she perched near the window fan and dozed with her tail twitching. Flick sprawled beside her, belly up, unbothered by anything except the occasional bee. Sawyer snored from his usual spot under the kitchen table. And Huck moved between them all like a slow river, calm, steady, purposeful. It had been over a year since he'd brought Clover into our lives. A year since he'd stood guard, teeth bared, body stiff, over a kitten too weak to breathe right. A year since everything shifted. Now the farm pulsed with life. Animals came and went. People too. School groups, volunteers, lost souls who found their way to our quiet corner because they'd heard about a dog and a kitten and the strange, patient love that had started it all. One afternoon, I received a letter from a girl named Lily. She was 11. Her family had recently adopted a dog with anxiety, and she wrote about how hard it was to help him feel safe. But she'd seen a video about Huck. She'd read our book. She told me she now sat with her dog each morning, just sitting, no talking, no petting, just like Huck did with Clover. And now, every time she walks into the room, he wags his tail. "I think Huck taught me how to be quiet in the right way," she wrote. I pinned her letter beside the others. Then I sat on the floor, surrounded by animal sounds and slow fans, and I just breathed. That week, we received a call about a litter of puppies found beneath an abandoned trailer. Only 2 had survived. We named them Dilly and Max. Both were thin, shaking, not more than 5 weeks old. We set them up in a crate inside the house, away from the bigger animals. Huck watched me the whole time. Then, when I opened the crate, he lay down beside it. He didn't stick his nose in, didn't bark. He just let them know he was there. It took 3 days for them to stop hiding. A week before they began to play. Each time I saw one of them toddle toward Huck, I felt something bloom in my chest. Like pride, like awe, like the way you feel when you witness something sacred and small. By midsummer, the sanctuary was running smoother than I ever expected. We had regular volunteers now, a rotating group of neighbors who helped clean, feed, medicate, and soothe. A retired carpenter rebuilt our fence. A college student set up a donation system online. I didn't ask for any of it, they just came. And through it all, Huck remained our center. When a nervous dog arrived, he greeted them gently. When a new cat hissed and spit, he stayed nearby. When I lost track of time, he nudged my knee. When I was tired, he leaned in without a sound. I watched the way Clover still curled into his side during thunderstorms, how Flick darted circles around him in the field, but always returned to nudge his chin. Even Sawyer, with all his pride, let Huck rest his head beside him in the shade. One morning, I woke to find Huck missing from his usual spot. It was early, sun just beginning to rise. I searched the house, then stepped outside. I found him near the fence line, sitting alone, staring out at the field. I walked up beside him. "What is it, buddy?" He didn't move, just looked ahead, ears tilted, body still. Then he turned his head and looked at me. And I knew. He wasn't looking for anything. He was remembering. Maybe the night he found Clover. Maybe something from before that. Or maybe he was just appreciating the quiet, the way only a dog like him could. We stood there a long time. In the fall, a journalist came from out of state to write a story about the farm. She spent 3 days here, just observing. She barely asked questions, just watched. On her last morning, she asked, "Why do you think Huck did it?" I didn't need clarification. I knew she meant that night, the one that started it all. I said, "Because he remembered what it felt like to be alone, and he decided no one else should go through that." She nodded. "Do you think he knows what he started?" I looked at him. His calm eyes, his steady breath, the slight tilt of his head as he watched Clover leap from windowsill to counter. I think he knows exactly what he's done. And I think he's not done yet. That evening, I received an email from a publisher. They wanted to turn the book into a children's series. 1 story per animal. 1 lesson each. I thought about Flick's bravery, about Maple's gentleness, about Sawyer's slow trust, about Rowdy's silent return to joy. And I knew I could do it. Because Huck had taught me to listen. Because Clover had shown me that healing isn't loud. Because every creature that had passed through our gates had changed something in me. And because this farm, this soft, muddy, lively, ever-changing space, wasn't just a sanctuary. It was a living story. In early winter, the first snow returned. Flick chased flakes on the porch. Clover batted at the frost on the window. Huck, now a little slower, his face a bit whiter around the muzzle, sat in the center of it all, tail thumping in rhythm. I watched him, remembering everything. And I whispered, "You did good, Huck. You did more than good." He looked up at me, eyes soft, and gave the smallest, slowest wag. Outside, the world kept spinning. Inside, we had everything we needed. And in the middle of it all, a dog who refused to let anyone touch the kitten until the moment he knew it was time. And from that one moment, everything grew.